The mountain had been rumbling for days. Not the kind of sound that makes you stop what you're doing, not yet. Just a low growl deep in the earth, like the gods clearing their throat. We felt it in our feet when we walked the stone floors of the villa. We heard it in the stillness of the afternoon, when the cicadas stopped their singing and the air hung heavy and strange. But we didn't run. We didn't pack our things and flee into the hills. We were Romans after all, or at least we served Romans, and Romans don't flee from mountains. My name doesn't matter now. It was stripped from me the day I was sold in the Forum at Pompeii, a boy of 12 with olive skin and dark eyes, torn from my mother's arms in a village whose name I can barely remember. I became what they made me, a body, a pair of hands, a voice that answered to you there, or boy, or nothing at all. I lived in the house of Marcus Fabius, a wine merchant grown fat on the volcanic soil that made the grapes of Campania famous across the empire. His villa sat on the hillside overlooking the bay, with marble columns and painted frescoes of gods who never answered prayers. It was the 24th day of August, in the year we now call 79 AD, though we didn't mark time that way then. We counted from the founding of Rome, from the reigns of emperors, from harvests and floods and the victories of generals whose names we were made to memorize. The sun rose that morning the way it always did, burning through the sea mist, turning the water gold. The mountain, Vesuvius we called it, stood purple and hazy in the distance, its slopes covered in vineyards and cypress trees. It looked peaceful, almost gentle. I was in the kitchen before dawn, as always, grinding grain for bread. The stone handmill was worn smooth by decades of labor, by hands like mine that came before me and would come after. My shoulders ached. They always ached. The overseer, a freedman named Quintus with breath that smelled of sour wine, walked past and cuffed me on the ear for no reason except that he could. I kept grinding. The household was already stirring. I could hear Domina, the mistress, calling for her hairdresser, her voice shrill and echoing through the atrium. The master had guests coming for the midday meal, important men from Herculaneum and Neapolis. Everything had to be perfect. The floors had to shine. The silver had to gleam. We slaves moved through the villa like shadows, invisible until we were needed, and then expected to appear as if conjured by magic. But something felt wrong that morning. Even before the sky changed, even before the mountain spoke with a voice that could not be ignored, I felt it in my bones. The air was too still. The birds were silent. The dogs in the courtyard paced and whined, their ears flat against their skulls. Old Lucia, the cook who had been in the household longer than anyone could remember, kept looking toward Vesuvius and muttering prayers to the household gods. She was Greek, captured in some long-ago war, and she remembered things. Stories, warnings. "The earth is angry," she whispered to me as I brought her the ground flour. Her hands shook as she kneaded the dough. "The mountain breathes fire in its belly." I wanted to ask her what she meant, but Quintus appeared in the doorway and barked orders, and the moment passed. There was work to do. There was always work to do. The Romans measured life in labor, theirs in conquest and commerce, ours in the thousand small tasks that kept their world running. We were the hands that built their temples, the backs that carried their goods, the invisible multitude that made empire possible. By mid-morning, the rumbling had grown louder. The master and his guests were reclining in the triclinium, the dining room, picking at honeyed figs and dormice roasted in honey and herbs, delicacies I would never taste. I stood against the wall with the other serving boys, holding a pitcher of wine watered down to the proper Roman mixture, waiting to refill their cups. They talked of politics, of the new Emperor Titus, of grain shipments and gladiatorial games. They laughed too loud and ate too much, their faces flushed with wine and self-satisfaction. Then the mountain screamed. It wasn't a sound, not at first. It was a feeling, a crack in the fabric of the world, a rupture so violent that the wine in their cups rippled and the frescoes on the walls seemed to shudder. The guests stopped talking. Even the master, who feared nothing he could see, went pale. We all turned toward the garden, toward the open sky, toward Vesuvius. The top of the mountain was gone. In its place, a column of smoke and ash rose into the heavens, black and roiling, shot through with fire. It climbed higher than any building, higher than the clouds, spreading out at the top like a pine tree, the kind that grew in the Forum, elegant and dark. But there was nothing elegant about this. The earth beneath our feet shook. The very stones of the villa groaned. Somewhere in the house, pottery shattered. A woman screamed. "It's the gods," one of the guests whispered. "Jupiter is angry." But it wasn't the gods. It was the earth itself, tearing open, vomiting out its molten heart. And we, all of us, slave and free, rich and poor, we were insects before it. The master tried to maintain order. He stood and clapped his hands, his voice commanding. "It's just an earthquake," he said. "We've had them before. Return to your—" The ground heaved. I fell to my knees, the wine pitcher shattering on the marble floor. The columns swayed. The ceiling cracked. And through the windows, through the doors, we could see it. The mountain spewing fire and stone into the sky, a fountain of destruction rising miles above us, blotting out the sun. Panic came then, like a wave breaking over the shore. The guests scrambled for the door, shoving past each other, their dignity forgotten. The master shouted for his strongbox, for his documents, for his wife. The slaves, we looked at each other with wide eyes, and in that moment, a terrible question hung between us. Do we run or do we obey? Quintus made the choice for us. "Move," he roared. "Get the family out, the carts, the horses, move." We moved, not because we were loyal, but because we didn't know what else to do. This was the only world we knew. These walls, these orders, this life of servitude, it was all we had. Where would we go? Who would we become if we ran? I helped carry the mistress's jewelry boxes, heavy with gold and precious stones. She wept and wailed, clutching at her hair, her carefully arranged curls coming undone. The master barked orders that made no sense, demanding we save furniture, statues, wine jars, things. Always things. Lucia grabbed my arm as I passed, her old fingers like iron. "Go, boy," she hissed. "Run to the harbor, get on a boat, don't look back." "But the master will die like the rest of us if you don't use your head. The mountain is falling. Can't you see? The mountain is falling." And she was right. Already the sky was darkening. A shadow spread across the land as the column of ash grew wider, blacker, blotting out the noon sun. And then it began to rain. Not water, stones. Pumice, they would later call it. White and gray rocks, some small as pebbles, some large as fists, falling from the sky like hail. They clattered on the roof tiles, bounced in the courtyard, struck the fleeing guests on their shoulders and heads. People ran with their hands over their faces, screaming, stumbling. Blood ran from scalps where the stones had hit. The air filled with dust and the smell of sulfur, a stench like rotten eggs that burned the throat. I ran. I don't remember deciding to. I don't remember dropping the jewelry box or leaving the villa or choosing a direction. I just ran. Through the garden where the fountains had run dry, where the statues of nymphs and satyrs stood helpless and still. Through the gate, past the master shouting my name, or someone's name, any slave's name. Down the hill toward the city, toward Pompeii, where thousands of voices rose in a collective wail of terror. The streets were chaos. People poured from their homes, from shops, from temples, all running in different directions. Some headed for the gates, for the roads that led away from the mountain. Others ran toward the Forum, as if the center of civic life could protect them, as if laws and order meant anything in the face of this. Carts overturned. Horses reared and bolted. A woman clutched a baby to her chest, her face streaked with ash and tears. An old man sat in a doorway, too weary or too wise to run, his eyes raised to the darkening sky. The stones kept falling. They piled in the streets, crunching underfoot, covering the cobblestones in a layer of white and gray. The air grew thick with ash, a choking fog that burned the lungs and stung the eyes. I wrapped my tunic over my nose and mouth, but it didn't help. Every breath was agony. Every step was a struggle. The world had become a nightmare of smoke and fire and falling sky. I saw a temple collapse. Just fell inward, the columns buckling under the weight of the ash and stone piling on the roof. The crash was enormous, a sound that seemed to come from inside my own chest. People who had run inside for shelter were buried in an instant, their screams cut short. I stood frozen, watching the dust cloud billow out into the street, swallowing everything. "Move, boy, move." A hand grabbed my shoulder, another slave, someone I recognized from the market. His face was gray with ash, his eyes wild. "The harbor," he gasped. "We have to get to the harbor. The boats." Yes, the boats. That's what Lucia had said. Get on a boat, get away from the mountain. I nodded, and together we ran. But the streets were a maze, and the ash was falling so thick now that we could barely see. Buildings loomed out of the darkness like ghosts. Bodies lay in the street, whether dead or unconscious. I didn't know, didn't stop to check. The living stumbled past the dying, each person alone in their terror, in their desperate hope that they could outrun the wrath of the mountain. We turned a corner and found the street blocked. A wall had collapsed, spilling bricks and timber across the road. We backtracked, lungs screaming, legs shaking. The weight of the ash was growing. It covered everything now, inches deep and still rising. My feet sank into it with every step, and I could feel it piling on my head, my shoulders, trying to bury me where I stood. Lightning split the sky, not the clean, bright lightning of a storm, but something stranger, darker, forking through the ash cloud in jagged spears of purple and red. Thunder rolled, but deeper than any thunder I'd ever heard, a sound that came from the belly of the earth. And underneath it all, the mountain roared. A continuous, deafening bellow that drowned out screams, prayers, the pounding of my own heart. We never made it to the harbor. The streets became impassable. The ash was waist deep in places now, and still it fell, relentless as winter snow, but heavy, so heavy. Each step required lifting your entire leg free, then plunging it down again, and the effort was draining what little strength I had left. My companion, I never learned his name, kept stumbling, falling to his knees, dragging himself up again. His breath came in ragged gasps that I could hear even over the roar of the mountain. Then the smell changed. The sulfur grew stronger, mixed with something else. Heat. Not the clean heat of a summer day or even a baker's oven, but something foul and wrong, a heat that seemed to suck the air from your lungs before you could breathe it. The ash cloud was descending, pressing down on the city like a hand closing into a fist. "We need shelter," I shouted, though my voice was barely a whisper. My throat was raw, torn by ash and smoke. A building, something stone. He nodded, or maybe he just collapsed. I grabbed him under the arms and dragged him toward the nearest doorway, a shop of some kind, its wooden door hanging open, banging in the hot wind that had begun to howl through the streets. We fell inside together, onto a floor already covered in ash that had blown through the cracks. I kicked the door shut, though I knew it wouldn't matter. Nothing would matter if the mountain decided to swallow us whole. The shop was dark except for the orange glow that filtered through the shutters, not daylight but the reflected fire from the mountain. We could see it through the gaps in the wood, that terrible column of flame and ash, still climbing, still spreading, turning day into night. The stones had stopped falling, I realized. Or maybe they were just buried under the ash. But something worse was coming. I could feel it the way animals feel earthquakes before they strike. The air itself was waiting, holding its breath. My companion lay on the floor, his chest heaving. Blood trickled from his nose, black in the dim light. "Are we going to die here?" he asked. His voice was that of a child, though he was a man grown. I had no answer. I was 16 years old and I had never been allowed to think about death. Slaves didn't philosophize about mortality. We were too busy surviving. But now, trapped in this shop while the world ended outside, I found myself thinking about my mother. I hadn't let myself remember her in years. It hurt too much, and pain was a luxury I couldn't afford. But now I saw her face, the way she had looked at me in the forum when they tore us apart. She hadn't cried. She had been so strong, so fierce. She had whispered something I couldn't hear over the auctioneer's voice. I hoped she was alive somewhere. I hoped she was far from here, from this burning hell that Pompeii had become. I hoped she would never know what happened to her son. The ground began to shake again. Not the sharp jolt of before, but a continuous trembling like the earth itself was shivering with fever. Dust rained from the ceiling. The wooden shelves along the walls swayed and creaked. Through the shutters, I saw something that stopped my heart. Fire, not the distant fire of the mountain, but fire in the streets. Buildings burning, though there was no wood left to burn. Everything was buried under ash. And I realized it was the ash itself that was burning. The mountain was raining fire. The surge came at dusk, though we had no way to know it was dusk. Time had lost all meaning in the darkness. It came as a wall of heat and gas and molten ash, a pyroclastic flow that would one day be studied and named and understood. But we knew none of that. We only knew that hell had descended to earth. The shutters exploded inward. The door blew off its hinges. A blast of superheated air slammed into us, so hot it seared the lungs, so powerful it threw us against the back wall like rag dolls. I opened my mouth to scream and breathed in fire. My companion didn't scream. He was dead before he hit the wall, killed instantly by the heat, his body already beginning to char. I should have died too. By every law of nature, every calculation that would later be made by volcanologists and historians, I should have been incinerated in that moment, my body reduced to ash and bone, my story ending in that unnamed shop in a city that would be buried and forgotten for nearly 1,700 years. But I didn't die, not then. The surge passed over us like a wave, the hottest part flowing down the street, seeking the lowest ground. What hit us was the edge, the periphery, still hot enough to kill, but I had fallen behind a heavy stone counter, and some quirk of air flow, some impossible stroke of fortune, left me in a pocket of cooler air. My skin blistered, my hair singed, my lungs felt like they had been scoured with sand, but I lived. I lay there in the darkness, unable to move, unable to think. The roaring had stopped. The mountain had gone quiet, or perhaps I had gone deaf. I couldn't tell. I couldn't feel my body. I floated in a void of pain and ash and silence. Time passed. I have no idea how much. Minutes, hours. When I finally moved, it was because I had to. Some animal part of my brain, the part that had kept me alive through beatings and starvation and the casual cruelties of bondage, that part screamed at me to move, to live, to refuse to die in this place. I crawled. The shop was filled with ash now, several feet deep, still warm to the touch. I pulled myself through it toward where I thought the door had been. My hands found bodies, not just my companion, but others who had run inside seeking shelter. They were hard, already cooling, their features obscured by ash. I didn't look at their faces. I couldn't bear to. The street outside was unrecognizable. The ash was everywhere, a gray landscape without feature or form, covering everything, smoothing the world into a featureless plain. Buildings were buried to their roofs. Some had collapsed entirely, leaving only mounds of rubble beneath the ash. The air was still thick with particles, but the falling had slowed. I could breathe, barely, through the cloth I pressed to my face. I stood on what had been a street and turned in a slow circle. The city was gone. Pompeii, with its forums and temples, its theaters and bathhouses, its 10,000 souls gone, buried, erased. The only things still visible were the highest rooftops, poking through the ash like islands in a gray sea. And in the distance, barely visible through the haze, Vesuvius. The mountain was still there, but changed. Its top was gone, blown away, replaced by a gaping crater that glowed dull red in the darkness. Smoke still rose from it, but lazily now, like a beast that had exhausted itself in fury and was settling back to sleep. I started walking. I had no destination. The harbor was buried. The roads were impassable. Every landmark I had ever known was hidden or destroyed. But I walked because stopping meant dying, and I wasn't ready to die. Not yet. Not when I had survived this long. I passed bodies. So many bodies. Some were buried to the waist as if the ash had grabbed them and pulled them down while they ran. Others were huddled in doorways, families clutching each other, frozen in their final moments. I saw a man covering a child with his own body, both of them now statues of ash and death. I saw a dog still chained to a post, its body curled in agony. I saw the rich and the poor, the free and the enslaved, all equal now in death, all rendered anonymous by the gray shroud that covered everything. I wanted to weep for them. I wanted to weep for myself, for my lost mother, for the boy I had been before they made me a slave, for the life I would never have. But I had no tears. My body was too damaged, too dehydrated, too broken. I could only walk. The ash began to thin as I climbed higher away from the city. I was heading inland toward the mountains that ringed the bay, though I didn't know it then. I was following instinct, following the ancient human drive to seek high ground when the lowlands flood. My feet were bloody. My skin was burned and peeling. Every breath was a knife in my chest. But I walked. Dawn came, or what passed for dawn, a gray lightening of the gray sky. I found myself on a hillside looking back toward where Pompeii had been. There was nothing to see, just a plain of ash, smooth and unmarked like freshly fallen snow. Here and there, a column or a rooftop broke the surface. Smoke still rose in places where fires burned beneath the ash. But of the city itself, of the people and the noise and the life, nothing remained. I sat down on a rock and stared at that gray wasteland. And for the first time since the mountain exploded, I let myself understand what had happened. Not just to the city, but to me. I was free. The master was dead, surely, buried with his villa and his wine and his precious things. Quintus was dead. The mistress was dead. The whole system that had bound me, that had defined every moment of my existence, was buried under tons of ash. I was free. But what did freedom mean when there was nowhere to go? When everyone and everything I knew was gone? When I was injured and alone on a hillside with no food, no water, no plan? I laughed. It hurt my ruined throat, but I laughed anyway, a bitter, broken sound that echoed across the dead land. I had spent my entire life dreaming of freedom, and now that I had it, it felt like nothing, worse than nothing. It felt like a trick. But I didn't die on that hillside. I found water, eventually, a stream running down from the mountains, still clear despite the ash. I found others, survivors like me, wandering in shock through the devastated landscape. Some were from Pompeii, others from Herculaneum, which I learned had been hit even harder, buried not in ash but in a river of superheated mud and rock that had hardened like concrete. Still others were from the villas and farms that dotted the countryside, people who had fled when they saw the mountain wake. We banded together, as humans do. We shared what little we had. We helped each other walk, find food, stay alive. No one asked if you were slave or free. Those distinctions had been buried with the old world. We were just survivors now, just people trying to make sense of a catastrophe beyond comprehension. I made my way north eventually, to Rome. It took weeks, traveling with others, begging for food, sleeping in ditches and abandoned buildings. When I reached the capital, I disappeared into the crowds, into the anonymous mass of the poor and displaced. I took whatever work I could find, hauling cargo on the docks, cleaning stables, anything that didn't require me to explain who I was or where I came from. I never told anyone about Pompeii. What would I say? That I had been there when the mountain fell, that I had seen hell open its mouth and swallow 10,000 souls, that I had survived when so many others, better and stronger and more deserving, had died. No one would believe me, And even if they did, what would it change? The years passed. The empire went on as empires do. New emperors came and went. New wars were fought and won and lost. Pompeii became a memory, then a story, then a footnote. The land where it had stood was eventually reclaimed for farming. People built houses on top of the ash, never knowing what lay beneath their feet. I am old now. My hands shake when I write and my eyesight is failing. The burns I suffered that day left scars that never fully healed, and my lungs still rattle when I breathe deeply. But I am alive. Against all odds, against all logic, I am alive. And I remember every detail of that day, the smell of sulfur, the taste of ash, the sound of the mountains roar. I remember the faces of the people who died, though I never knew their names. I remember my companion in the shop who asked if we were going to die and who I couldn't save. I remember old Lucia who told me to run and who I hope found peace in whatever moment death found her. I write this down not because I think anyone will read it, but because the dead deserve to be remembered. The city deserves to be remembered, not just as a cautionary tale about the wrath of nature or the indifference of the gods, but as a place where people lived and loved and suffered and hoped, just as people do everywhere, in every time. We think we are permanent, we humans. We build our cities of stone and marble, we carve our names into monuments, we tell ourselves that our civilization will last forever. But Pompeii taught me the truth. We are temporary, all of us. Our lives, our works, our empires, they are dust waiting to happen, ash waiting to fall. And yet we go on, we rebuild. We start again because that is what humans do. We are stubborn creatures, resilient and foolish and brave. We stare into the face of oblivion and we say, not today, not yet. We have more to do, more to build, more to love. I was a slave in a city that no longer exists, in a time that will one day be ancient history. But I lived. I survived. And in surviving, I bore witness. The mountain still stands, you know, Vesuvius. It sleeps now, quiet and peaceful, its slopes green with new growth. People have returned to the land around it. They plant their vineyards in the rich volcanic soil. They build their homes in the shadow of the mountain. They forget. But the mountain remembers. Deep in its belly, the fire still burns, patient and eternal. One day, in a year, in a century, in a millennium, it will wake again. And when it does, I hope there is someone there to remember what I have written here. To remember that once, long ago, there was a city called Pompeii. And in that city there were people. Real people with real lives who laughed and wept and dreamed and died. Remember them. Remember us. Remember that we were here and that we mattered, if only for a moment in the long, indifferent march of time. The mountain will have the last word as it always does. But until then, we have our words, our memories, our stubborn refusal to be forgotten. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that is all any of us can ask for. To be remembered, to have our story told, to leave some small mark on the world before the ash falls and covers everything. I was there, I saw it, I lived it, and now I have told you. Remember,